Do you like what you hear? Then you need a Devon bass. Devon bass. Better by design. Whether you're old school or whether you're new school, we discuss it all for the only one that matters. Christian Talk with Christian musicians. Welcome back. Mark's not finished talking. I'm not finished listening. Let's join our interview in progress. Marc Miller, part 2.
Well, it's YouTubeitis. We're all about, you know what? This isn't something new. When I was young, it was all about chops. Okay. I grew up in the era just slightly before you, but you know what I'm talking about. Jocko, Stanley Clark, those fellas. And so I learned every Return to Forever tune. I learned the solo for So Long Mickey Mouse. I learned all these Stanley Clark things, and they were great, but that's about chops.
Yeah, but not applicable. I mean, good to have that vocabulary, but you can't use it all the time. Right?
No, and it was like I remember so much when I after that conversation with you, I started working with a gentleman by the name of Cliff Davies, who used to be Ted Nugent's drummer. All right, and he had retired, obviously, and he was living in the area, and I was his go-to bass player. He finished my education on bass as a drummer. And I'd work in the studios, and we started working with a click. He says, Page Love, and he always called me Love. I said, Cliff, we're in Paulding, by God County. I am not your love. I never will be. He says, right then, Love. All right, here's what I want you to do. And he got me to work on burying the click. Yes. He says, you do your exercises, and he says, do your exercises, do your licks, whatever. But he says, as you approach locking in to the groove, he says the click is going to recede into the background. Yep. And then eventually what's going to happen is you're not going to hear the click anymore because you are so stupid locked into it. And he says, and this is where the magic happens. Yep. When you're not locked into the click, beat one goes, and you're trying to chase after it, right? But he says, when you're locked into the click, all of a sudden beat one is this big. And you have all this space. You can say, I can play to the front of the beat. Mm-hmm. I'm still on time, or I can play to the back of the beat. And and he says it's only at that point where you become a player.
That's right. You are absolutely correct. Dead on the money. Dead on the money. And in all things, even though that is true, in all things you have to suit the tune. And so there's a time and a place for chops. I mean, there's no arguing that. But generally speaking, chops are something that what I tell my students is, if you think you have to play something, don't play it. You want to play it when you know you have to play it.
Yes.
In other words, it should just kind of you should harvest that instinct and just do exactly what needs to happen when it needs to happen.
Yes.
And if you're paying attention, burying the click and doing those sorts of things, if you're paying attention to it, that becomes very obvious after a while.
You know, I always tell my students is that you have to earn the right to show the world how cool you are. You have to earn that right. Yeah. And Vic Wooten says something. He says, groove isn't everything. It's the only thing.
It is. That's right. Yes.
It's the only thing. And I was with a blues band called the Rhythm Raiders, and I worked with a drummer named Charlie Korch, which, by the way, pray for Charlie. You know Charlie?
I know.
Or you talked to him?
Yeah.
He's in the hospital. He's a big guy. He has lymphedema. And they're finally getting around to dealing with it. But I mean, he's suffered from it, and it's really getting bad. So, but anyway, I worked with him, and for a really big guy, he had really light hands. I mean, he do his ghost notes in the snare. It's like his stick is just grazing the top of the snare. But he and I got to know each other so well. When I first started working with the band, all about the groove, I just laid right in the pocket. Nobody out there in the world knew that I had a sewing bone in my body. And as we became comfortable as a band and started locking up, Charlie and I started locking up, I began to notice that how he would set up a fill. And I began, and I could hear it happening, before it happened, I knew he would do something that was set up like a triplet field. And I hear it coming, and then I would lay one of my chop type things over the top of that triplet feel, and he would just get this great old big grin on his face. And we became married at that point.
That's and there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that.
And
I know.
But I had to earn that right, because when I was asked to join the band, it was after he'd heard me in another playing situation, and there were no chops in that other playing situation. I just played the groove. And when you're playing blues, especially blues, dude, it's all about the groove.
There isn't a type of music where it isn't all about the groove, Paige. There really isn't. Even if, I'm a huge prog rock fan, right? So I'm like really into Yes and Genesis and Kansas and stuff like that. There's a groove there too. There's a groove in Vivaldi. There's a groove in Purcell. There's a groove in Nellie Bell, Stravinsky, Aaron Copland. Everything has a groove. It's just understanding that groove is difficult sometimes, right? If you're playing in 17/16, there's a groove there. I know.
These are difficult times.
That's exactly right. 17/16. Yeah.
I know, right?
Let's not even talk about the fact that at Berkeley they say there's no time signature over 4/4. We're not going to get into that, but whatever. Or 6/8, 9/8. It's not really.
When I was graduating from Armed Forces School of Music, to graduate, if you're a rhythm section player, you had to put together a set of music yourself. Every rhythm section player had to do it. Right. And they really liked it if you came up with something original. And my bass instructor wanted me to come up with something original. So I took, the book that we were studying out of was The Evolving Bassist by Rufus Reed.
Oh, yeah.
And I took a bass groove from the beginning of his book, chopped a beat off the second measure. So instead of 2 measures of 4, it was a measure of 7. And everybody's going, whoa, that's really innovative. I'm going, thank you, Rufus.
Yeah, no kidding. Who would have thought of that? 7. Yeah.
Yep. But it's all about the groove. And the other thing I'd forgotten about, you'd mentioned earlier here in our conversation, was about serving the song. The role, I went from being a bass player to a role player, where all of a sudden I realized my job is to make the drummer's job really easy. His job is to make my job as a bassist real easy. And that's where the snare comes in, the backbeat. Because Cliff reinforces, he says, Paige, my kick isn't the secret to what I'm doing for you.
That's right.
You listen to the backbeat. He says, you're laying down 1 and 3. I'm laying down 2 and 4 at its most basic. And he says, I'm giving you the time you need, but it's on my snare. So once you realize that, and all of a sudden you realize that your job collectively is to make it so that whoever's singing or the solo artist or whatever, they should have no anxiety whatsoever. They should just feel the song.
Yeah.
And if you've done that,
there's the concept of your job making the drummer feel better. There's the concept of the drummer making you feel better. And your job together is to make everybody else feel better.
Yeah.
Right. And that does not usually come in the form of overplaying and making everybody else struggle. It's like you always want to start out with a good, solid foundation.
They need to know where 1 is.
Yeah. Well, or where, the and of 11 is, depending on.
I was working I got called in to play at the big band at the Perimeter Church here in Atlanta. It's a huge Reformed church, PCA church. And they were having a big Easter cantata. And this is way, way back when Lord, I Lift Your Name on High was a thing. But they were doing this Latin version of it. And it's huge big band Latin version. And me and the drummer got there. Me and the drummer. I've got 3 college degrees, and that's how I talk. The drummer and I,
there you go.
us got together. He and I got together and we worked up this really cool Latin groove. And it was, all this kind of stuff. And we laid it down. And there's an introduction, and then the trumpets have to come in with a really big pow into the song. And the director stopped the first time, says, Paige, could you just simplify it just a little bit? I said, sure. I simplified a little bit. He stopped.
A little bit more.
A little bit more, yeah. And then he stopped again. He says, I hesitate to ask. He said, better yet, will your guitar cord reach out to where I'm at in the podium? I said, sure. He said, come on, stand next to me. So I came out and stood next to him and said, all right, I want you to do what you worked up. All right, so he did it. And then he stopped the band. He says, now, do me a favor, play just a real simple bossa. Boom, 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 boom. And he said, and then he leaned over and whispered to me, watch the trumpet section. So I went boom, 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 boom. And the minute that groove started, you see the trumpet section go, pow, and they hit it. And he stopped. And he says, now do you get it? I went, I feel like I should give you my paycheck, because that was a master class in what I'm supposed to do. My job isn't to play this cool Latin groove. My job is make it so that the trumpet section, who had a difficult place to come in, that there was no doubt about where they would come in.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, it's not necessarily, and unless the listeners or watchers of this think that what we're saying is you always have to play like dumb. You have to dumb it down. That's not what we're saying.
It's not about dumbing it down.
It's not. It's not. And there are times and places where something busy is appropriate, right? But that's, and I'm not even going to sit there and say that it's less of the time or more of the time. It's whatever the song calls for.
Yes.
The main thing to remember is, as a player, and this has nothing to do with being a drummer or a bass player or anything else. The main thing to remember is that you don't want to crowd things. Everybody has something they're trying to say, and they need to have room to say it. Otherwise, it's like, who hasn't been in a crowded party where there's a room in a crowded party where you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and you have to like yell in their ear and they're getting about every other word. Well, when you crowd the measure, that's what's happening. And everybody else that's trying to talk is yelling in somebody else's ear. And that is not.
Yes.
When's the last time you did that and you were relaxed and felt good about?
No, you're on the edge. You're uneasy.
Exactly. Yeah. And you walk out of the party going, oh my God, it was so loud in there. That's what's happening. That's what we're talking about. It's not a matter of simple or complex. It's, are others being allowed to talk while you're doing this?
I was at a talent show where they brought musicians in at the last minute, and it was almost like a session thing where you don't have time to rehearse. They sent the charts out ahead of time, and they expect you to show up knowing the stuff.
That's what you're supposed to do anyway, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why that should be such an exception.
Rehearsal's not practice. That's right, yeah.
And it was the song we're doing is that Tom Jones. It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. By da 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 da. We're doing that, and this singer, this lady singer, was really, really uncomfortable, and she had you could tell she was really uneasy until the band was about halfway through the introduction. I swear, you watch her, she's like, oh, okay. Boom. It's not unusual to be loved, and she just fell into it. We drew her into it, and she felt comfortable with what we were doing. And again, it's just like, God uses things like that to reinforce the fact that it's not about me. If you're a bass player listening to this, there will be times when it'll be about you. But I had a guy in a session once tell me, he says, don't ever make me ask for less, because if I have to ask you for less, I'm not hiring you again.
That's right.
Make me ask you for more. Make me ask you for more. And that's where the chops come in. Yep. Hey, Paige, could you put a fill on the eighth, on the turnaround?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been waiting 35 years to hear that question.
But after a while, especially if you've worked with this guy enough, you know when he's going to ask for that. You don't even have to know. He isn't even asking. You're just going to do it. But the only way you can do that is to pay attention to what's happening around you. And the only way you can pay attention to what's going around you is to let others talk.
Yes.
Right? It's not about what you play. You've heard me say this a million times. It's not about what you play. It's what you don't play.
That's Vic Wooten says that he says funk isn't in the notes you play.
It's in the notes you don't play.
It's in the notes you don't play. He says he said, play the holes, baby. Play the holes. Right.
Nobody tacits like me, baby. Nobody.
Nobody.
That's right. Nobody. I dare you to tacit better than me. But,
so how has the session scene changed, in your opinion, between 80s when you were doing it and now?
And now, yeah. Well, first of all, with the advent of COVID, it's changed again.
Yes.
So, right. So used to be you did everything off the floor, right? Or most things off the floor. then it started being more like, okay, I'm going to go do a session with just me and a drummer, and we're going to track the guide tracks.
Right.
That was something that started little bit by little bit, and then it became the norm. So
multi-tracking. You're not playing live anymore, except perhaps you and the drummer.
Yeah, or maybe a keyboard player, and almost always with a drummer. Almost always with it, right? And then you and the hard part there is you're not hearing the entire song. You might not even have a vocal, so you're trying to imagine stuff in your head,
right?
What it's going to be or whatever. So you have to become a little bit more creative, and that became more and more normal. And then all of a sudden, I'd be doing sessions, and there would be no drummer. It would just be me, and I'm playing to a drum machine, and the drummer's going to come in 3 weeks. In fact, I have a really funny story.
That would be so difficult knowing that.
It is. Well, I did a session several years. Oh, it must have been almost 20 years ago now, up here in Seattle, where I didn't know who the players were going to be. They just, I got called in, a sax player. He's like, "I'm going to book you for a session." Okay, fine. So I come in and I go, "So who else is playing?" I got there early. It's me, the sax player, and the engineer. And he goes, "Oh, I got this guy, Don Garber. He's going to be playing piano." And I went, "Don Garber? Yeah. Where's he from?" "Well, he just moved up here from LA." And I went, "Wow, that's interesting. I've done sessions with Don Garber before." Here's the funny part about that. I'd never met him. I'd done sessions with him, but I'd never met him, which is a weird thing. And when he walked in the room, he's like, "Hi, I'm Don." I go, "I'm Marc Miller." He goes, "Marc Miller, wait, did you?"
I've done sessions with you.
He goes, "We played together." I go, "Yeah, we played together on like, I don't know, 10 or 11 records, but we never met each other." And that became more normal. So I would go in and Paige, I've done sessions where I come in and I got nothing but a chord chart and a click track. There's nothing there. That's really daunting. Those are not my favorite ones to do.
Well, because you realize then everything that happens after that point is going to be based on what you do. So don't suck.
Well, what you have to do there is, that whole thing about being simple and trying to make, have a conversation. You have to put your part of the conversation down, knowing that there's going to be other conversations around you. That's really difficult. And I think when that became the norm, that's when you and I and other bass players of our particular vintage, shall we say, started noticing that it's all eighth notes. That's all anybody's ever doing now is only eighth notes, because that's kind of all anybody can think about doing. So, and then
it's easy to line up eighth notes with the click.
It depends. It depends on the engineer
and the player.
And the player, exactly. And then, so that became kind of the norm. So I would go and do a session. It would be me and an engineer, and that's it. I wouldn't even meet the artist for that.
Right.
Until much later, and then, if at all. And then when COVID came out, then it was, I'm doing it from my house and I'm sending the tracks out. Right.
Yes.
And so then, now that's more daunting in a different way, because if I'm in a studio for some reason, I'm just a Pavlovian response type person. I'm in a studio, I start thinking a certain way. But if I'm at home, I think, "Oh, this is my safe place. I can do whatever I want." And all of a sudden, I'm turning in tracks that are like your guy. Can you simplify that a little bit? Because I'm not in that mindset.
Yeah.
Right. So so I've gone from playing with a bunch of people to fewer people to nobody to doing it at home and maybe over a Zoom call with somebody. And that it just becomes difficult to do. Right.
Yeah. Incredibly difficult.
Yeah. So there you go. That's really how it's changed. And I don't know how it's going to go from here, but now you've got applications like SessionWire. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yep.
Yep. I have it. I just did a session on SessionWire a few months ago, and it was the weirdest thing ever to do that. And
I've never done SessionWire. What was it like?
It's strange. I did I probably should not say who the person was, but it's a pretty well-known drummer.
Mm-hmm.
I did he might be playing in a band that does things like they have a lot of grand illusion to what they do.
Okay.
There you go. Anyway, I did a SessionWire thing with him, and there's a latency thing you have to wait for, and then there's like a handshake, and then you start, and it's weird because I'm really used to even if I'm in a studio, I can feel the kick drum coming through the walls, right? I don't get that. It's like you're completely divorced from any of the physicality of playing, of
Wow.
others playing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a very, my camera's acting strangely there. Sorry about that. It's a very weird feeling to not, the guy isn't in the room, but he's talking to me. He's topical about what he's talking about. We're having a conversation. Well, what about this? What about that? And he'd go, well, what about this? And, and then we'd start to roll again, but I'm still, nothing changed, right? It's not like, okay, now he's playing harder. No, it's still the same level coming here. I'm not feeling it in the floor.
There's no dynamic thing happening.
It's like, it's really hard. So like, you really have to overdo the dynamics. You have to really be thinking much farther ahead than you would normally be. And punch-ins are super weird.
Well, I would think that as technology, and it's going to happen, as technology improves, that's probably where it's all headed. Because you stop and think about it, just if you, from the guy who's producing and funding the album, studio time is pricey.
Oh,
I mean, to go into one of these studios, it's magic. I mean, I remember when I went to Nashville, the minute you walk into one of these Nashville studios, dude, there's magic in the air. I mean, it's a magical place. You're in a room where the people that you adored have recorded. I was in a room in Nashville where Elvis Presley had recorded, and there was a cabinet off to the side that was crunched down, door hanging on one hinge, one leg missing, hole in the side. And I said, "What's with that?" And he says, I said, well, why don't you get rid of that? Because it's not even used. He says, oh, no, Elvis kicked that in.
Yeah,
we keep it because that's an Elvis. It became an Elvis shrine. But when you walk into a place like that, there's magic. It's undefinable. But yeah, with COVID, and it happened with my teaching for a year and a half, there was no one-on-one face-to-face teaching. I had to learn to do everything virtually. And I imagine the time is coming when the technology will catch up with us, where it will take care of this latency issue.
I hope
where
so.
You and I will be able to sit down and play live, and there's no latency that you have to. That just drives me insane.
Yeah, it does. It drives me nuts too. But you kind of you start to get used to that and how you deal with it. But what's interesting to me is, even though the playing has changed, when I get into a live situation, it's like click, I'm right back where I needed to be. Right. I did a session about, it was about 7 or 8 years ago, where we tracked live off the floor, which is you just don't do that very much anymore. And one of the engineers that was working at this particular studio went to the Seattle Art Institute before they closed down. And so he mentioned this to his prof, and his prof's like, whoa, we should send a film crew out to film that because it's such a novelty. And I'm going, what?
Yeah, I know.
This is how and so they were just blown away. But now, luckily, the people that I was playing with, they were all like hardcore session guys. This is my Northwest Jazz Collective bunch that I play with all the time. And these guys are the cream of the crop session players here in Seattle, I should say. And so we nail things in one take. And the guys that were there from the Art Institute were like, "Wow, how long did it take you guys to rehearse to do that?" And we're like, "We're just reading the charts, man. What are you talking about? There's no rehearsal. We just what? That sounded like you played it for a million years. I got a piece of paper in front of me, tells me what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, huh? Right. Well, how does that work? I mean, you guys were like emoting. You were making music, but you're reading. Like, yeah. And boy, it is. Well, like, I just never thought about that being something different. It just didn't Unfortunately, that was like 7 or 8 years ago. That was the last time I did a live off the floor session.
Well, it's a lot. Some of my students have gone and they've actually started their own recording studios, and their modus operandi now is to do separate tracks, to track people. They don't get them together. They track them, and they, some of them will start with a drummer and bass player on the floor or whatever, and build up from that. And but they don't have any concept of bringing musicians together. And when the Rhythm Raiders did their album, we decided, and we asked the studio engineer, said, "Look, we want to do this live. Set us in a room And we recorded. We had to put the singer into a cabinet, but it had glass walls, so he could still be part of what was going on.
Right.
But we all sat down, and they had like waist high baffles and positioned at certain places. But we played the album live, and it was you
Isn't that
can't.
fun?
Oh God, you can't. You know, we could have tracked it, but there's an indefinable something that comes from playing live with players.
Extreme sports for musicians. Yeah,
oh, dude,
absolutely. But nothing feels like that.
And I would say that's probably in my eyes, that's the biggest difference between now and when back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, is that there's almost none of that anymore.
That's true. It's true.
You would agree?
I would absolutely agree. You know, if you want to, now we can watch this. We can bring this back full circle.
Mm-hmm.
What we've been talking about has been this subtle compartmentalization of how music is performed, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is an absolute one-to-one analog between that compartmentalization and what we were talking about with spiritual compartmentalization.
Mm-hmm.
They are one and the same. And if you think back to like the church in the 70s, right? It wasn't compartmentalized. Not really. Not like it is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's, I have a certain way I behave myself. You know, I have certain things that I do. It's not a matter of behaving. It's there are certain things that I do on this day versus this one day. Or there's a certain way I talk to people of faith, and then there's a certain way I talk to people. There was none of that. And as we've gone down the road, and you can blame it on whatever you want to, we've dumbed things down. We've made it so that we're basically tracking as Christians apart from a body a lot of the time, right? There's a one-to-one analog, and what it's done in at least in the music world, I think, is it has pablumized, my own word, it's pablumized music, because you have to make it down to the lowest common denominator in all things in order to function.
And not only that, the thought just occurred to me, when you become compartmentalized, there's nothing to check you.
That's right.
Like when you're in a band playing live, you're playing in an atmosphere where what you do is determined by the collective. You have to play to the song. You have to play to what the band is doing, and you're held in check.
And the feedback you're getting from the crowd too. You play to what they're doing too. Yeah, absolutely.
But when you're playing, when you're just tracking like what you're talking about, compartmentalized, there's no give and take. There's no check. There's no check system. There's not, you don't really have another drummer to work off of, or the singer or whatever. And it becomes very sterile in a lot of ways. And I would think today's church is like that in many ways.
It is.
I think that's what I hear you saying.
Like that. Right. And to use another musical analogy here, it's, if you listen to, I'm sure your viewers know who Jeff Porcaro was, right? I think
if not, they should.
If not, they should. And for those of you that don't know, he was the drummer for Toto most famously, but he played for absolutely everybody. And you will not find drummers that don't know who he was. And he passed away a number of years ago. I had an occasion to do one session, but I was not the bass player. I was the engineer on a session with Jeff Porcaro. And it was just him and I and one other person in the studio the whole day. It was unbelievably awesome. I have lots of stories about this. But here's the interesting thing. I asked him one time, so we're doing this project for a pretty well-known Christian band. It's like we tracked for a Christian band on their, I think it was their third album. Anyway, I asked him, how do you approach these songs? He goes, well, it's really easy. My philosophy is I'm going to play verses. This is just how he did it. I'm going to play verses on the click. When I get to the choruses, instead of speeding up, I'm going to slow down just a little bit, which if you go back and listen to things like Lowdown by Boss Skaggs. If you go,
I love that song.
That's a great tune, and it's like, and everybody's listened to it. When you listen to the choruses, listen to what Porcaro does. When he gets into that chorus, he actually backs the tempo down. It's not very much. It's just a little bit, and it makes the chorus feel huge. And then when he comes back into the verse, he goes right back into time, and it makes it all tight and funky again. So he did everything backwards, right? Most people play the verses, fairly on time, and when they get to choruses, they speed up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
which that can be done, but he didn't. He always tried to slow down the choruses. And it was amazing to me. I didn't, when you're listening to it, you don't really notice it until you really critically listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Jeff Porcaro sound, right? That's what people would hire, is for that particular sound, right? And there was a personality that was added to music because of the way he played. It was absolutely magical, right?
Wow.
And nowadays, we don't want that. We want somebody we're gonna compress things so that their levels are the same. We're gonna tie it to a click so that we're not bothered by anything. That translates into the church. We don't want the personality. We want you to act a certain way or look a certain way, like you were talking about, right? And if you don't, then we can't use you. That really, really hurts to hear stuff like that. And we've kind of lost the what the person is adding to the music. Now, in some churches, they go where I think, and I'm probably going to get a lot of grief. You'll probably get some grief for this. When you get in churches that use tracks, that's like the ultimate bad to me. Right? Because now you're really taking all the personalities that are on that stage, the people that have put in the time, you're taking all of that and saying, none of that matters. What matters is that we sound like the record.
It's funny. The church I'm in, we use tracks at times, but it's primarily like a pad. It might be a string section because we don't have strings. They'll add what we don't have, but the rhythm section, we play it the way we want to.
Okay.
And now, since we're playing to a click, then everything that's on the tracks will fit in with what we do. But but they don't double our instruments. They don't. It's a different way of playing.
Yeah. I'm grateful. I played the sequences for years and years and years. I know exactly what that's like. But and a lot of the churches that I've seen are doing it where they'll have a guy with an acoustic guitar and they'll have 3 vocalists, and that's it. It's on stage, but you got this full rhythm section with strings and I'm like, and horns, and I'm like, now just a darn minute here.
You got the whole Michael W. Smith happening behind him, and it's a guy in acoustic guitar and 3 voices.
I've never understood that. I mean, yeah, it's great to sound full, but you know what? That's not what you are. That's not who you are. Your church has a personality. Why not have that? What's wrong with that? If you're, I don't think that everything has to be hip or jazzy or funky. No, suit your congregation just like you would suit a tune. It's the weirdest thing about. If your congregation is super into what a mighty God we serve, and that's your 1 and 3, everybody's clapping on 1 and 3 kind of right. If that's what your congregation needs, then play that and be happy playing it and serve your congregation. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing. You don't have to sound like Hillsongs to be right.
I will say this church is really, really weird in the sense that there's very little political crap happening behind the scenes, very little. And I can say that for a fact. And technically it's a mega church. I mean, we'll have like 1,500 people on a Sunday. So it's on the small side, but it's a mega church type thing. But our worship pastor, he's a skinny jean wearing guy, but he serves the song. And he wants, like, I have one of my students who plays lead guitar for him now. She's like 19 now, and she plays lead guitar for him. And she dropped a lick from, they were at rehearsal, and she was noodling, and Carrie turned around and says, "Wait a minute, was that the lead guitar solo from Bohemian Rhapsody you were just playing?"
Nice.
And she was like 18 at the time. She says, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry." And he says, "No, we're going to use that. I like that."
Dude, I'll go you one better. The jazz collective that I have, which is, like I said, is a bunch of cream of the crop session players here in Seattle. We all played at the same church. That's kind of how we got together. Just we didn't try to. We just started doing that. So we'd have 2 services with a big space in the middle between the 2 services on a Sunday morning. And so we would go get breakfast between services. And we had this running gag where somebody in the band would pick a song that everybody had to quote during the worship service. Okay. And if you didn't do it, you had to buy breakfast for the band. So, and by the way, it started out with things like, okay, Wonderful Tonight by Eric Clapton. So somebody has to play that, right? They had to do that, yep. Right? But I'd come in and go, The Grand Wazoo by Frank Zappa. So somebody would have to quote that. And I never once had to buy breakfast. I will say that. I never had to buy breakfast.
My favorite thing was I would quote the bass line from The Joker.
Oh, yes, on any number of tunes.
Yeah, because it's just dun, 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 and it would be cool. I'd be playing it, and the worship pastor would turn around and give me the side eye, and I just grin. But I would look out at the audience, the congregation, and like all of a sudden their heads are poking up like gophers. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I know that.
I know that.
What was that? Yeah, I know. I've done that too. But like on Lord, I Left Your Name on High, you could totally get away with that, right?
Totally get away with it.
Anything well, hey, it's 145, you can do that with. There you go.
So anyway, well, dude, this has been awesome. I think we've gone over our hour. But thankfully I have editing. I can delete what I need to. I hope I don't delete any of this because it's been awesome.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad. I'd love to do this again anytime you want to do it. This is fun stuff to talk about. I love.
You know, if at any time you just have like a push button topic that you just think that you're really passionate about, and you would like to spend some time chatting about, dude, we can make it. We can make it happen.
I would love to. I've got a topic that I would really like to talk about.
What
on this? Well, it's about how Microsoft Word has ruined music in the church.
Oh, dude. That would be a great, that would be awesome. Golly, I'm going to have to reschedule now because I don't know why that would be. Huh.
What?
All right.
Why?
We'll do it.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
It'd be a fun conversation to have because I'm very worried about how music in the church is going to get handed down to young people after guys like you and me are gone because there's no lingua franca anymore. Right. And that could be a problem. So, yeah, love to have that conversation.
Oh, dude, we'll just have to make that happen.
If you don't mind stirring up a little controversy, possibly.
Controversy? Thy name is Marc Miller.
Oh, baby. You know it.
Man, I love you. It's great talking with you again. And we will definitely do this again coming up in the future.
I'd love to. Anytime you want to do it. And if you want to do something on a live stream, I'd be totally down with that too as well.
Sweet. We'll see if I can master the technology. Technology is not always my friend.
Me neither. And that's
I've tried. I was doing my devotionals on Facebook Live, and Facebook has not been kind to me. And so I've quit doing the Facebook Live thing because 2 minutes in, it just drops me. My son is pretty much convinced that it's an anti-gospel thing from Facebook, and they're just shutting it down. But I just happen. My son is a conspiracy theorist like you have never seen before. He's awesome.
Oh no. Okay. Well, all right. We should get into those conversations sometime. That might be. But no, I'd love to do it. I mean, I've done some streaming on YouTube and it works pretty well. So if you ever want to try doing that, we could do that.
All right. Well, no, you can take me to school on that. Gotta go, brother. Thank you so much, folks. Marc Miller. Be good.
Bye, guys. See you.
Bye.
Bye.